Hi everyone, it's Jerry. Let's have a look at a game from round 10 of the 2018 Candidates Tournament. On the white end, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. He's paired against Fabiano Caruana. This is a big game going into this round 10. Tournament standings, Mamedyarov is clear second with 5 points, and Caruana is clear first with 5.5. So let's dive in and see what happened in this one. We have an ever-popular Catalan Opening. With this capture on c4 and knight to c6, what is something to note about the black side? Well, the c-pawn is obstructed, and so black will be on the lookout to challenge white in the center with e5. Continuing, the white king is safe, and the rook is now certainly respecting the bishop and preparing to now hang on to c4. White secures d4, and after bishop e7, looks to hunt down this pawn with the underdeveloping knight f to d2. Doing it in a different way, with the queen knight or queen targeting c4, I'll permit b5. Not now, though. The knight has pressure on it. At the same time, this move has given up control of e5, so e5 hits. And with these next three moves, three imbalances are injected into the position. See what they are. First a capture on c6, e5, and c4. So let's just pause for a moment. What has changed here? What are these imbalances I'm speaking of? Well, for one, super valuable bishop has been exchanged for a knight. 2, black has a compromised queenside structure. And 3, it is now white who has a slight material plus. White's up a pawn. Black, however, is on move. Developing with a threat, that's defended, and now in comes h5, something you might see quickly played in some bullet game. Looks like if it has a name, it might be some caveman variation of the Catalan. This is a serious move. White is without this master defender, and there is a hook. h4 right around the corner, and the rook is ready to be brought to life. White has some light squares that are weakened on the king side. White responds well, immediately kicking the knight. He doesn't budge, however. Instead, we have queen to d3. Just to highlight the seriousness of this last move, if you were playing on the white side and you ignore it and just say, you know what, my bishop's doing nothing, let's get him fianchettoed, this is going to hurt. h4, now it's too late. You want to play a move like f3, you have to be aware of these tactics. And if I'm not going to go any further, it's already a mate in 3. This king is going down. And if instead of this move you say, well, I'm not going to allow h4, I'll play h4 myself, your king side will get ripped to shreds with g5. It's a move you really have to take seriously. White does, with f3 right now. The knight doesn't budge. Queen d3 is the reply. The computer, in fact, suggests that you could still play h4 in this position, giving up the knight just to peel open the h-file. Pretty crazy. It cites something like this, where the queen could sneak in. We got the bishops coming in like this. Okay, it's getting pretty crazy. Black is down a piece but has active pieces. We don't have that. We don't have h4 in this position, but rather queen d3, drifting deep into the white camp, counterpunching at c4. What follows? Capture on g4, capture on c4, capture, capture. No more minor piece imbalance, but certainly we have a structural imbalance, material imbalance that is still present. Continuing, capture on h5. White is now up 2 pawns. Queen e6, looking to get one of them back. Can't take this pawn right away, though. Queen is ready to strike at f7 if so. So, what does Caruana do? Throws another piece on e5. Queen f5. Rook takes e5, gets a pawn back. Queens are now off, and there are a few tactics now in the game. this now turns towards a much more technical position. So, pop quiz at this moment right here. We've quickly gone through the middle game and arrived now after these 19 moves at an endgame, where white is now up a pawn, but black is ready to scoop it back up. What would you do in this position as white? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, the best move is the move played in the game. Rook to f5. It's extremely important that you play rook to f5 in this position. Otherwise, black will have an advantage. The other tempting approach is to simply defend a pawn with a pawn. Ideally, you would like to have this situation. Instead of devoting one of your pieces to the defense of a pawn, you devote a one-point piece to this job. g4 would not be a good idea here because of g6. Black would immediately break down this structure, and what are you doing? This pawn is in a pin. How do you defend it? h3 is no good. Rook f4 gets hit with bishop here. You have to worry about h2. Big problems can quickly arise if white tries to defend this pawn with g4 instead of the move in the game, rook to f5. This move is best. Continuing, what do we have? Rook to d6. Now, white is up a pawn, but slightly behind development-wise. Queen, bishop, queen, rook have yet to move. Black looks to take advantage of this with rook to d6, eyeing up that back rank. Continuing, king g2. This bishop is now in a pin. b3. Bishop b2 is not the idea here. It may be a different situation, but this isn't the idea at this point, as rook to d2 would pick off the bishop. So what do we have? g6, rook to e5, and now we have c5. Now, at this point, white has to, black has to be a little bit careful after this last move. Their idea is to capture the bishop, luring the king onto a dark square, and then giving a check, releasing an attack against the rook. So we have c5, so this interferes with this idea to take out the bishop and then deploy the bishop with check. Capture on g6 follows. After recapture, we have e4, so now this is very serious for black. The threat, knock out the bishop and go in a different direction. Bishop g5 with check, and then you would win the rook. How is this parried? This is the best move. Rook h7, the move played in the game. Rook takes bishop would be met with rook takes rook. Black is with this rook lift defending against that two-move trick. Continuing, we have h4. This king is ready to play a very active role by way of h3 and g4. What do we have next? Rook f7. While I was watching this game, I thought, is g5 a possibility at this point? Breaking down at h4, trying to get to the back rank. g5 would not be a good move here because this pawn becomes passed and is way too fast. It would be true that you could end up winning the bishop, but after g7, what do you do to stop the pawn? The rook wouldn't be around, the bishop certainly won't be around. You would have to devote the king, and now he is overloaded on f7. 2 jobs, and that's 2 jobs too many. White would take and go into Pac-Man mode. White would be winning. Long story short, g5 is not a good idea here. Correct idea is to get to the back rank, but you have to invest, you have to go with the move rook to f7. And you're not giving up, you're not giving white a passed pawn. So this is the idea. Not much that white can do about this. Black is going to be winning this bishop in just a few moves. So in the meantime, white says, well, I might as well get my king activated. So that's what we have. King h3. Rooks are on the back rank. Bishop is now developed. The rook is taken out, but white gets the bishop. So where do we stand here? Material-wise, how many pawns? White has 5 pawns, black has 4. Black is in check and has a big decision. You could go here, and, you'd be going into a discovered check. There's not some wonderful discovered check that would, let's say, win a rook, as they are protecting one another. Black has coordination. The big question to ask here is which of the black pawns is most important to black? The answer to that is g6. Without the g6 pawn around, that would mean that white would acquire 2 connected passed pawns. So knowing in this position which of the black pawns is most important, lets you know in which direction the king should go. King f8. He needs to stay nearby to defend against the rook, capturing on g6. Going here, it's a discovered check, and the pawn is going to be won. Scary. Most likely winning for Team White. In the game, it's king to f8. Black gives up the c-pawn. Rook takes a. Following up, bishop e7 check, king g8. Rook check, king g7. Another pawn is picked up, and with this, material is equal. It's an imbalance. We have 4 pawns versus 2. So what's the situation? It's a bishop and 2 pawns versus a rook, type endgame. Let's see how play follows. First, this is the most dangerous pawn. It's a passer. Black gets behind it. It gets pushing, though. It can't be captured because there'd be a pin. Now it's back on. Black is defending against bishop d4. Rook takes pawn is a threat. It's defended with rook to e8. And now, what to do? Bishop and pawn are both hit. We have bishop to d6. This is a very strong bishop, controlling this passed pawn, and soon it's going to act as the superglue for the white position. There'll be a pawn on b4, a rook here. It'll be tying everything together. Let's see how these next few moves pan out. We have some checks given in this position. Notice the moves. We're approaching move 40. So a little bit of, what is white doing with these checks? Trying to reach move 40 to gain an additional 50 minutes on the clock. So with those checks, we're approaching move 40. b4 is move 40, 50 minutes for Mamedyarov. And after one more move, Caruana will be banking 50 minutes. b4, move 40. Notice the coordination that white has, starting with the bishop. He's gluing everything together. Rook, pawn, everything is connected. Where is white vulnerable? Are there any points vulnerable? Yes. The base point within this structure, g3. That's what black targets. Doubling up on the third rank. This pawn is going to fall. There is not a way to successfully defend it. e6 would simply drop the bishop. So the king now flees. Runs towards the center. This is what white has to try here. What you certainly have to avoid as white is a capture, and then, you don't want to be forced backwards to the second rank, because then the rooks, black would have some serious threats of delivering checkmate with just these 2 pieces alone. So king to g4. Rook takes g3. Rook f3. Is this going to end as a perpetual check? No. Black has to be very careful. King to g5. You can't just go into this check, check, check like crazy until you can check no more mentality. Rook g3 would be a losing move for black. I'd like to highlight this. If rook g3 in this position, the king hides on h6. You can't successfully get at him. And all of a sudden the king starts to take away squares from the black king. So something like rook g4, and let's say h5, a capture. The king is safe. e6 would follow, and there's mate right around the corner. There's not a successful way to stop mate. All these squares are taken away from the king. Bishop is helping out. You could take the bishop here, but you get mated. Long story short, rook g3 no good. King h6, and black is in trouble. Black is losing. So what is played in the game? Rook f7. Offering a rook exchange. e6 follows. And we have rook check. So white could also look to capture here, but black would first insert a check, force the king in front of this passed pawn. That would be a key move, and only then exchange rooks and activate the king. We don't have king takes pawn here, but rather e6. Check first, king takes pawn, and now rook takes bishop. White cannot take the rook with the pawn because there's a pin. So what follows is rook takes pawn. This is certainly getting very simplified. White is up a pawn, but that's short-lived. Rook e4. Material is restored, and at this point, I'm sure you know the direction this one is going in. Some checks thrown in. This game ends up going right down to king versus king, which of course, draw on board. A close one, an interesting imbalance in the endgame. Some possibilities for some crazy tactics early on in the middle game. Then it got very technical in the endgame. Both players playing extremely accurate chess. We have a look at the tail of the tape on this one. Yeah, this is very accurate play. This point right here, queen to d3, is the one inaccuracy it considers of the game. Queen d3 instead of that computerish move. Of course, h4, giving up the knight on g4. Aside from that, yeah, it is very close to equal the whole way through. And I'm sure some of you are already peeking at the numbers here on the right. Inaccuracies, mistakes, and blunders. Only one inaccuracy in total. 5 average centipawn loss for Mamedyarov, 4 for Caruana. These players are both playing at a very high level in this tournament. Again, neither, after now this 10th round game, have suffered a loss. So we'll see what happens in the rest of the event. As usual, feel free to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. And I hope you enjoyed it, maybe took a thing or two away from it. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.